Hey there, I'm Mark Colgan and welcome to part 2 of this 4-part cold email crash course video series. Today we're going to be focusing purely on data and research, which is actually one of my favorite parts of the prospecting process. So in the first video we covered things such as the ideal customers and the buyer personas that we want to target. We're ready to start kind of building our list to make sure that we have these prospects in a list that we can upload into our cold email software like SendNow. So in this section and in this video, we're going to cover the following. We're going to talk about the importance of triggers and signals, kind of a passion of mine, so I'll go through those in a lot of detail. The lead research process, your options for building lists. So you could do these manually, you could buy the lists, or maybe you can outsource it, and I'll share the pros and cons of those different options. Then we need to think about list segmentation. And then lastly, 2 important facts such as email verification and data cleansing. Once we complete this section of the data and research and we've built our lists, we'll then be able to move on to the third part of this video series, which is all about the messaging and the sequences. Let's dive in. So we're in the workbook, and as I mentioned, it's part 2, data and research. The first thing that I really want to cover about data and research is to think about your triggers and signals. So triggers and signals are essentially a way to help you identify prospects who are more likely to be buying or actively looking for a solution right now. And in this section, we'll share how you can understand which triggers are going to be right for you and your cold email campaign, and how you can actually use those to increase the relevancy of your message when you're reaching out to prospects. Now, a really important stat to remember is that at any one time, only 3% of people are actively looking for a solution like yours. 7% are intending to change maybe in the future, maybe it's a priority for next month. But that means that the rest of them, the 90%, aren't actively looking for a new solution. So the key with triggers and signals is to try and identify people who are more likely to be in that top 10% than those in the 90%. In the past, I think a lot of people used to send out the same message to 1,000 CMOs, for example, without really looking to see what triggers and signals could they look for. If you're targeting marketers as an example persona, one of the triggers that you could look for is if they've recently started in a new role, because when people start in a new role, they're likely to make changes and either bring in their existing suppliers from previous companies or look for new vendors and suppliers for the company that they're joining now as well. So this is just a bit of context on triggers and signals. And what I've done is I've put together a list of 30 plus B2B triggers and signals that you can look at for your prospecting. Now, you'll have access to this if you download the workbook, and you'll have access to all of the links within the workbook here. But I just want to go through a couple of these examples to show you what they are. So I've split them into a few different levels. There's the individual level triggers, account level triggers, and then there's also the persona level triggers, which I'll go through in a little bit more detail. But as I said, you can look at this in your own time. On this matrix here as well, you have the relevance factor. So how relevant is this trigger likely to identify that this person is interested on a scale of low, medium, and high? And then we've got difficulty and time. And that just really means, is the data easily available to get? And does it take a lot of time, or does it take a small amount of time to find this data? So some very simple ones, which you may have heard of before, are looking at people who have published content about a specific topic. So maybe they've been on a webinar, either hosted it themselves, or they've spoken on somebody else's webinar. Maybe they've engaged in content, they've commented or liked on other people's content. And also new to role, change of role. These are great triggers that you can look for. So when somebody's new to role, they're most likely to make some buying decisions. And then when there's a change of a role, so they've been promoted internally, that's another time, which is just good to get your brand in front of them, so that when they come to thinking about changing anything within their existing setup, they may think of you. On an account level, so account being the company, you've got the technology that they use. So if they started using a specific technology and your service or your software complements that technology, then it might be worth reaching out to them. For example, if you sell a call recording software to help sales teams, and you only integrate with Salesforce, then you want to make sure that you're building your list of accounts and prospects who are definitely using Salesforce. There's no point in reaching out to them if they're not using the CRM that you integrate with. It could be that they've received a round of funding. Oftentimes, if a company raises a Series A, they have to do a lot of things differently to get to that Series B and to reach those targets that the VCs have set for them. So there's change happening, and where change is happening, it increases the likelihood that your solution might be right for them. Of course, your solution has to be good, and it has to to help them solve the problems that they're facing. So when it comes to thinking of the triggers and signals, you really need to ask yourself, what happens to my prospects or my prospects' companies before they need a solution like mine? And I've got a couple of examples that I'd like to go through here. So let's just say that you're a HubSpot CRM consultant. So you could be tracking if somebody starts using HubSpot. And then when you get that alert that this company and these companies have started using HubSpot, that's a great time for you to reach out and offer any support, any guidance around the mistakes that people often make when they start using HubSpot. Because you want to start that conversation, get that reply to eventually be able to sell to them. Another example could be if you're an employee onboarding software, so this is HR technology. So a company that has either raised a round of funding, or they're currently hiring and they're hiring multiple roles, that's a good time to reach out to them because their existing software, if they have one, might not be fit for purpose to grow with them as they bring on these new team members that are hiring for or that they're planning to hire for in the future. Let's say that you're a product onboarding service, which is the example I'm going to be using for the rest of this video series. You might want to reach out to people who engage with content that influencers are sharing within the industry. And I'm actually going to show you how to do that in just a second. For more context, I've recorded a video a few years ago now, which talks about lead sourcing. It really explains it in a little bit more detail than I have for the time to go through today. So you can feel free to check out that additional YouTube video there. So one of your action items at this part of the video series is to ask yourself, what happens to my prospects or their companies before they need my service, my product? Review the B2B sales triggers that I will share with you as well, and note down a few triggers in the table below. So this is for you to go and fill in. So write down the trigger, so the trigger just being one of these in column B, and then also the hypotheses. So with hypotheses, what I mean here is like, well, why is it important? What is the compelling reason that they may be more interested in working with you now based on the trigger? And then the source is to think about, well, where can I find that data? Is LinkedIn going to help me with that? Or are there other tools and technology that I can use, like such as databases, to help you find that data? We'll move on to data sources in just a second. It's impossible to record one video which covers all of the data sources, but I've done my best to give a few different examples. Once we've had a thought about our lead sourcing triggers, we want to start researching and building our lists. So it follows the previous section, and now that we've identified our ideal customer profiles and the buyer personas, we know exactly who we're trying to reach. You need to start that research process, and I like to do this in 3 main steps. I go for the accounts first, then personas, and then I look for the triggers. So when it comes to data sources to find accounts, it really does depend on who you're trying to reach out to. There are industry-specific databases that you could use, and there are also general business or B2B databases that you could use as your source. So some of these common databases are LinkedIn, Sales Navigator. So that's probably the most up-to-date B2B database. There's Apollo, which is an affordable B2B database that I use on a regular basis. You've got other databases like Cognism, Lusher. Lusher is actually quite good for mobile numbers, especially if you're in the EU region. You have Ocean.io. They find lookalike audiences, so you can upload a list of existing customers or existing prospects, and it can find additional ones that match those criteria. And then you've got databases like Clutch, which is agency specific. It's a directory of agencies, and directories can be a great place to start finding the accounts that are right for you. Then you also have Store Leads. This is a specific platform for e-commerce leads. Depending on the trigger that you're using, you have a few different options. So if you're looking for currently hiring, so companies that are actually actively hiring at the moment, then you could look at Clay or Blueprint, and all of these links are in the workbook here. If you're looking at LinkedIn post engagement, which is the example that I'll share with you shortly, you've got Phantom Buster or TextAU to try to get that data into a spreadsheet. New hires, so when a company is hiring or somebody has recently started in a role, you can use Clay for that enrichment. And then using technology, Built With and Similar Tech are great platforms that allow you to set up alerts for when a company has started using HubSpot, or when a company has started using a live chat software like Intercom. You can get an alert of 60, 70 companies on a monthly basis or weekly basis, depending on how you set up the alerts, that you can then use to prospect. Key thing here is that you're only targeting a small segment of these leads that have reached that trigger, which means that these lists are dynamic. that means is that every month you get a new list of leads who who are giving that signal or trigger. So an action item here, start to search for your sources of data that you can find accounts that match your ICP. As I said, it's very hard to record this one video and give an answer for everybody. But if you start by simply searching database for X or contact details for X, you should be able to find some data sources. Now we're going to move on to building that list of prospects. And now that we have those accounts that we want to target, we need to find the people within those prospects, within those accounts that match our buyer personas. This is what I call enrichment, just this phase of the research. And there are three main ways to build your prospect list. There's the manual way, which you can use databases and automation to help you with. There's the outsourced way, or you can buy them, you can purchase the lists as well. So when it comes to manually building the list, it really gives you the most control. The person who's going to be sending out the email, yourself, gives you the most control, but it can take a lot of time. But with automation tools like Phantom Buster and Clay, as well as subscriptions to databases like Apollo or Cognism, you can speed up this process. As I mentioned, I could produce a whole separate course, and maybe we do in the future, about lead sourcing. However, what I want to show you is how you could use Phantom Buster to solve one of the research lists that I'm looking for. In this case, I'm going to use the trigger, which is engaged with content on LinkedIn, to find prospects that might be interested in my product onboarding service. So just for context, this is a separate business that I have here, and I'm going to use this as an example. I often find that sometimes the examples for cold emailing are usually selling to other sales leaders, and that isn't always helpful. So in this case, this is a service that helps B2B software companies improve their free trial and activation rates by reviewing the onboarding process. So what I've gone and done is I've found a couple of people on LinkedIn who are posting about the topic of user onboarding. Now these could be influencers. I don't think they all like the label of an influencer, but these people are sharing specific messages about user onboarding. Maybe it's that they're producing a course, or they're just delivering some advice and some recommendations. So I've got 4 LinkedIn posts here where they're talking about user onboarding. Now my hypothesis is that people that are engaging and liking in this content are more likely to be interested in the product onboarding service that I offer. Now, of course, some of the people that are liking the post could be the brother, the partner of the person posting. So not everybody's going to be a fit. But remember, I'm trying to find that 3 or 7% of the market that are actively buying. And this is a great signal for me to look at to then work out if this message that I have to send to them is going to be is likely to be more relevant. So I'm going to move into Phantom Buster now. So I have put the URL of the TPO list here into Phantom Buster. I've asked it to remove duplicate profiles, so it may be the case that one person has liked more than one of these posts that I've found. And I'm just going to click Save. I'm going to launch the frequency once because there's not that many leads. It's not like there's going to be 1,000. There's only 100 or two. I'm going to click Save. And then once that's all set up, I'm simply going to hit Launch. Now, I did that before, and I found that there was 128 people that liked one of those 4 posts or multiple of those posts. But now I need to find their email address, and that's where Clay can come in and be really useful. So once I've imported that data into Clay, you can see that I've got the first name, the full name, the company URL, and the LinkedIn profile. I've actually set up an enrichment to find the work email address. And I'm using a waterfall or a workflow process to do this. What happens here is I'm using these 4 different providers that all come with Clay. This is obviously something that you do need to pay for. But what it does is it looks for this tool looks for their email address. If it can't find it, then it asks this tool to look for the email address. If it can't find it, it asks the next tool and asks the next tool. Now, you're not always going to get 100% of the emails here, but that doesn't mean that this prospect isn't a qualified prospect that I could reach out to. Perhaps I run a LinkedIn only sequence to these prospects where I can't find their email addresses. But you can see here that it's found the valid email addresses for the majority, which I'm pretty happy with. Now that I've got this list, what I'd need to do is to export that list, clean it, and get it ready to import it into Send Now so I could send my email campaign to them, which we will be covering in videos 3 and 4. Back to the workbook. So that was the manual process, and I wrote out the steps here so you could kind of follow along as well. When it comes to finding email addresses, there's a couple of tools and extensions you can use. Some popular ones are snov.io, Find That Lead, Prospecto, and Better Contact. They all work in a pretty similar way, if I'm honest with you. I have one or two at any one time on the go. And then for more over-the-shoulder prospecting videos or lead sourcing videos, I do have my own YouTube channel where I share these prospecting tactics, tips, and techniques as well, which again is linked here for you to check out in your own time. So that's the manual way of finding leads. Now I want to talk about outsourcing this process to somebody else. So if you have budget and also value your time, it might make sense to outsource the list building part of the process to somebody else. Now, I used to work for a company called TaskDrive. I was the general manager there, and that is all they did. They just did sales research for sales teams. And they have access to 30 plus databases and enrichment tools like Clay, and they build the list for you. So I think the current prices is $1,500 a month, and they send you a list of 800 to 1,000 verified contacts for you each month. So you don't have to do any of the work other than going through the onboarding process to explain who your ICP is, who your buyer personas, and what triggers and signals, and they may even suggest some as well. Of course, that's not the only option. There are some cheaper options and more expensive options, and I've put links to Database, Science, and B2B Rocket here for you to check out. I'm not necessarily vouching for them, but these are other companies in the industry that can help you with your lead research. The final option is freelancers. It is a great option, especially if you don't have much budget. It can take a little bit more management on your end though. There are marketplaces like Fiverr and Upwork which have thousands of freelancers on there for you that are willing to help you. I find that there's a lot of researchers oftentimes located in the Philippines, in India, in Pakistan, as well as in South American countries like Colombia, and I've seen a few in Argentina as well. Completely up to you of when you want to who you want to work with. Think of time zones, and if you want to be jumping on calls with people. Two things that I recommend is do have a call with your researcher. Sometimes the research requirements aren't as simple or aren't as black and white, so you just want to be able to have a call and have a conversation with somebody. So you want to make sure that their verbal English or whatever language you're speaking is going to work, and you'll have a good communication with them. And then also ask for a sample so you can see the quality of the work. I particularly look for how they formatted the document that they send me, if it has got all of the requirements that I'm looking for, and that's a bit of a red flag if they missed some of the points in the early sample here. And then the last option is bought lists. I'm not a huge fan of buying lists. I've tried it in the past and I haven't had the best experience with the data. Most of these companies will say that the leads that they have are opt-in, but in reality what I found that to mean is the leads have usually checked a box or a cookie consent form on a website to opt in, and they didn't really opt in to hearing from you. But buying lists can be really valuable in certain scenarios where the data is actually quite hard to get hold of. So lists of conference attendees, some people manage to find every conference attendee. I'm not quite sure how they do it. Lists of hard to find data like new office locations, and also lists of competitors, customers or clients. That can be another way that a bought list of leads could be quite useful. But again, always ask for a sample of these leads before you make that purchase. We're getting towards the end of the lead research, and here are just a couple of best practices that I want to recommend that you implement before you move on to the copywriting phase of this video series. So list segmentation and merge tags. It's really important to segment your leads into smaller lists. You've heard me say that in the first video. I've mentioned it a couple of times in this video as well. Rather than sending the same message to 2,000 prospects, you should aim to send your messages and your campaigns to smaller segments, and that will help you generate more replies. Just the example here, you can see if you send the same message to 2,000 prospects, you're going to get less than a 1% reply because those lists are too broad and the challenges that these people face are going to vary too much as well. That's why I'd recommend that you split your research into smaller segments. That could be 150, could be 50 prospects, could be 300. It really does depend on the total addressable market that you're going after. So that's one thing to consider. The second thing to consider at this stage, when you're doing the research, is what data do you want to be adding into your emails? And that is done by a process called merge tags. I'm sure there's different variations of that terminology, but a merge tag is the one that I'm most familiar with. So common examples of merge tags is when you add in somebody's first name or their company name in the email, or maybe even their job title. And you will see these in the brackets, and most of the cold email software out there allow you to do this. Just think, if you're going to put some of the data into your email copy, then you want to make sure that you're researching and adding that data as you build your list, so that you don't have to go back and then enrich that data any further. The last two things here are email verification. So it's really important to re-verify emails that you collect after building a list. So even using tools like Apollo or Cognism, I still double check all of the emails to make sure that I'm only sending to valid emails. That's going to protect my deliverability. I recommend using Zero Bounce or Never Bounce. SendNow has a built-in email verifier, so I trust that and I rely on that too. I uploaded around 20 prospects just to test out the verifier, and it verified that 18 of those were valid, they were good to go. The other two are risky. And when it's a risky email, I'm just not going to take that risk to impact my email deliverability as well. But these are the additional tools that you could use to add into your workflow as well. And there's a link to top email validation tools as well. And lastly, data cleansing. I see so many companies make this mistake. And this refers to the formatting of the data that you have in your list, especially when you are scraping lists from LinkedIn or building lists manually. You'll notice that some of the tools that you export the data in, not all of the information is going to be correct. So this could be that somebody has an emoji in their name on LinkedIn and it exports that into their spreadsheet. It could be that where you've got company name, it says Yellow O Limited or Speak on Podcast LLC. Or it could be just random job titles. I've seen some very funny job titles that people put on there, but you just want to make sure that a human goes through and double checks that those job titles are correct. So here's an example that I received just the other day where they have taken my job title from LinkedIn and merged it into the email. But what it should say is just advisor. But as you can see on LinkedIn in brackets, it says advisor, open bracket, B2B sales, marketing and agency growth. Now, if they had somebody go through that and clean that, which you can do with AI as well, you would have seen that it would just be advisor. And they make the second mistake in this email as well, which is they've added the H1 tag from one of my websites. So they should have cleaned that. So it just said Yellow O, not the rest of the title from the email, from the website there. So this is really important. This is a very well-known company as well who are in the sales space, and even they make mistakes. And the reason why this is a bit of a mistake is that it's a telltale sign that this is an automated email. And that's something that you want to avoid when it comes to sending your cold emails as well. So your last action item in this video is, regardless of which option you're choosing for lead sourcing, you need to get started building your lists and getting them ready for your cold email campaign. So that makes sure, meaning that you're verifying and cleaning the data, getting them ready for outreach. So that concludes video number 2, all about data and research. We covered topics like triggers and signals to find the most relevant prospects. We spoke about that lead research process and how to think about building those lists, whether you do that yourself manually in-house, you outsource it to a company or freelancers, or you even buy data. We also spoke about the importance of verifying emails or re-verifying emails and cleaning that data to make sure that we're not pulling in the different formatting or things that are going to make it look very obvious that this was an automated email. In the next video, we're going to focus purely on the copywriting of your emails and also the sequences for your cold email campaign. So we'll talk about how to build and write a really relevant email that focusing on the problems and challenges that your prospects have. We'll talk about the different follow-up options that you have to build out your sequence. I'm going to suggest a sequence for you to start with. There is no silver bullet when it comes to cold email, but from all of my experience, I'm going to share with you the best practices for not only the sequence, but also the subject lines, the calls to actions, as well as some other tactics that you can implement to ensure that your emails land in the inbox. That's it for now. See you in the next video.